They were unusually loud in their intervention. It's almost as if they didn't care that we knew what they were doing or that they wanted us to see what they were doing. It was very noisy.
In his testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, FBI Director James Comey noted how bold the Russians were in their interference in the U.S. election. But my next guest says that may be subtle compared to Vladimir Putin's approach to next month's French presidential elections. Christopher Dickey writes in the Daily Beast that Putin has endorsed his candidate, the far right-wing anti-European Union, anti-NATO, anti-immigrant, anti-American, pro-Trump candidate Marine Le Pen, who met with Putin in Russia on Friday. Dickey adds, people may joke darkly about Trump as the Putinian candidate, but about Le Pen, there is now no doubt at all. But Putin may want to spend less time meddling in other people's politics and mind his own, because today, crowds have gathered in most of Russia's major cities for demonstrations against corruption in Vladimir Putin's government. And back with me are Nayyera Haq and E.J. Dion. And joining me now from Paris is the aforementioned Christopher Dickey, world news editor for the Daily Beast. And Christopher, great piece that you wrote. Talk a little bit about this interference. The Guardian has a headline saying that Putin is told Le Pen during their meeting that Russia has, quote, no plans to meddle in the French election. You say that is balderdash.
No, it's absolutely balderdash. He received Marine Le Pen as if she were a head of state. She was shown to museums. She was meeting with the lower house, the leader of the lower house of parliament in Russia. Then she went and saw Putin. She wasn't on the official schedule, but immediately the Kremlin released photographs of Putin and Le Pen sitting together, conferring, so that she would look statesmanlike, which is something that very few people would have said about Marine Le Pen. And generally speaking, there's no doubt. I mean, Le Monde in the weekend paper said that he dubbed her as if he were dubbing a knight, his candidate.
And why does Putin want Marine Le Pen to be the president of France?
To destroy Europe. I mean, let's just be blunt about it. She wants to pull France out of the European Union. She's against NATO. She favors Putin's position in Ukraine and in Crimea. She would allow him to redraw the borders of Eastern Europe. All of that's perfectly clear and explicit. So, of course, he favors her, but he also thinks that she has a chance, which a lot of people had not given her until very recently.
Yeah. And E.J., you were a reporter, a journalist in Paris. You covered doings there. Do you think that Marine Le Pen, with Donald Trump now in the White House and people able to see that style of government operating in the United States, does she still have a chance?
Well, I actually think Trump may do the world a bit of a favor because a lot of Europeans are now looking at what we are going through and turning on their far right. You saw that a little bit in the Dutch elections already. Sure. Le Pen is running behind. But what Putin is doing is really fascinating. We talked about in the olden days, there was a communist international supported by Moscow. Putin is establishing a new far-right international. He's supporting anti-NATO, anti-Europe, right-wing, far-right parties in Europe against the Democratic left and the Democratic right and the Democratic center. And this is a very dangerous thing for democracy. And I think that the French are on notice that there may be more WikiLeaks kind of stuff coming in there. The advantage that the lead opponent to Le Pen, Emmanuel Macron, has is that there's the warning from the Hillary Clinton campaign, so they know that this is coming.
They know what's coming. And Nayyera, you saw in that Dutch election that you just mentioned that the Dutch, in order to prevent Russian meddling, they actually went old school. There were no computers used in the recent election. It was only after the U.S. blamed Russia for hacking during the presidential election political reports last year that the Netherlands announced it was dropping computerized voting entirely, trying to seal themselves off from this. They had 82% turnout, and the Putin candidate went down in flames.
Very hard. And this is a lesson for the United States to be learning from how people do things in Europe. The exact flip of what EJ was talking about, in that it is important to vote. I mean, we had, 70 million people who didn't even bother to show up to the polls. So low turnout is not helpful, particularly if you are someone who believes in democracy, liberal democracy and freedoms. It's not something you can take for granted. It takes active participation. And Putin relies on things like low voter turnout and low activism among the people. This is why they crush protests. They crush, he's arrested journalists in this recent round. So this undermining of the media is also very Putin-esque. And people are seeing these these activities happening in the United States, they should be worried.
Yeah.
And we should be taking action against
and an opposition
them.
leader named Navalny. I want to go really quickly, Christopher Dickey, I'm going to come back in a second, about that turnout issue. Are there any projections of what kind of turnout we're looking at in this French election?
Well, I'm afraid it could be low. I think a lot of the people on the far left are going to be disillusioned if it's Macron or Fillon, two of the candidates, a right-wing and a centrist candidate, are the ones who go up against Le Pen. And if it's low, that will help her a lot.
Wow, well, that's not a good thing. I want to quickly get in a couple other stories. I know you had a comment, EJ, but you also had this story that when he was meeting with the German Prime Minister, Donald Trump handed Angela Merkel a bill for 300 billion pounds, essentially the equivalent, a bill saying that Germany owes NATO and we won't really protect Germany unless they pay up. That's odd.
Well, he was treating NATO as if it were a Trump country club and that everybody has to pay dues, as opposed to an institution that has worked to protect both American values and American interests over a very, very long period of time. And something worth looking at is Steve Bannon's little speech back in 2014 in Rome to this conservative Catholic group, where he said, yeah, Putin's a kleptocrat, but he is supporting all of these traditional values. There's a great piece in Time magazine a couple of weeks ago about how Putin is sort of trying to curry favor with some of the more far-right people on the religious right and the traditionalist right. Remember, he is very pro-Russian Orthodox Church, very anti-gay marriage. So Putin is really very conscious of the kind of politics he is playing in the West, and it sure isn't the kind of politics that helps Angela Merkel.
And it explains why the Bannonites like him so much. Chris Dickey, I'm going to give the last word to you. Are there predictions now as to whether Marine Le Pen can actually win this thing quickly?
She can win it if there's low turnout and if a lot of undecided voters suddenly swing her way, which is something we saw in the United States. Yeah, she can win it. But fortunately, most polls show that she will not.
All right. Well, we will keep watching it and come back to you, Christopher Dickey, to follow that election, which is now actually quite important for the West. Nayyera Haq and Christopher Dickey, thank you very much. EJ is sticking around a bit.